Prior to that, I worked for 30 plus years with McDonald's Corporation, and my most recent position was Vice President Franchise Relations, working with about 1,800 franchisees covering all 14,000 restaurants in the US. And prior to that, I was the market CEO that included here the state of Colorado, but also 4 additional states, and it was 120 franchisees, 800 restaurants, and a $2 billion business unit. So quite fun, but also great learning along the way. In addition, I've authored a book back in 2012, Golden Opportunity. Can't say that I ever want to do that again, and really appreciate the educators who really have a knack for writing on a continual basis. Just this year, I started as an affiliate professor for Regis University, and my first solo class, if you will, is just wrapping up. And I feel like I can talk on this subject of change management, as I have been through 3 corporate reorganizations and 3 relocations along the way. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. I thought I'd start with a little levity here. I know the cartoon's a little blurry, but they're around the table saying, what if we don't change at all and something magical happens? I know we all know that nothing magical is going to happen, and the reality is that change is going to happen with or without us. But it's also a good reminder that there is no magic wand, hope is not a strategy, and in most cases we need to get on board and embrace change and move forward, whether that's in an organization, in life, or in general. So just reminding us of what has occurred the past 10 years, and as I put this together, it was quite interesting and an awakening, if you will, to just really understand what has happened the next 10 years, especially as we think about the future 10 years. There's been an exploding world population. However, in the US, 2018 showed a population decline. So that was big new news, and the decline is predicted for the future as well. Buildings are the tallest they've ever been, leading the way in Asia. There might be a contest there to see who can have the highest building, but if you live in Colorado, or even other metro areas, you've probably seen new skyscrapers growing like never before. The internet has changed the way we do everything. I'm sure you'd all agree. Social media, you say the bad and the good of social media, fact or fiction of social media, but just understanding if anybody has a point of view, they're going to share it, and they're probably getting a lot of people to jump into dialogue around that issue. Autonomous cars are a reality, and battery-operated cars are now becoming mainstream. Social issues are finding their way to the spotlight, whether it's the LGBT movement, Me Too, or race wars, if you will. They're being discussed in a way like never before, a lot of it being driven by social media. Business is now 24/7, whether we like it or not. I think the invention here of these smartphones has made that even more commonplace. There's less paper in the business environment, but there's more data than ever before. The more ability to gather data, slice and dice data, and use data to predict the future, especially when it comes to customer interaction. And the at-home consumer is the fastest growing consumer base in the US, really led by what Amazon has created. And now more and more people have realized that they can stay in home and never leave their house and pretty much get anything they want delivered to their doorstep. So if we think about 2025, again, I always thought 2025 was so far into the future. The reality is it's a mere 6 years away. And if our organizations aren't already considering what 2025 will bring to them and the changes they should consider right now, this hopefully will be a good prompter to have that conversation within the organization. We all know that the global markets are emerging, led by Brazil and China, but several others coming up as well. And knowing how that global market can impact the U.S. business is important as well. For those of you who might not know, there is a UN-endorsed corporate role for global good, which identifies 17 initiatives where they have asked major corporations, world leaders, educators to get on board in ensuring that they follow and, more importantly, influence change around these 17 initiatives. And many companies are stepping up to the plate on this. And the idea is we have to save Mother Earth for the next generation. So you'll notice a couple things on there, whether it's poverty, zero hunger, reducing inequalities, or ensuring that there's life below water, because nobody knows what might happen with global warming or other potential events. We also know the consumer perspective and demand is changing faster than ever. And if our company can't give it to them, they'll probably find somebody who can. So how do you keep pace with that? The role of the virtual office. This is kind of an interesting one when you think about all the businesses similar to the WeWork concept, where you can go to a virtual office, but there's also the desire by more and more employees to have flexibility to work from anywhere, whether it's this virtual office space, their home, and how does that impact really the brick and mortar facilities that are out there and being developed, just using some of the examples of larger skyscrapers than ever before. We've all realized and experienced the fast-paced change of technology. It's also important to think what skills, are going to be important for our future generations. And to the next point, what the role of educators will be with that. But also when you think about corporations, with technology, is there enough investment in the training of employees to use new technologies? Do we have enough doctors, or will we have enough doctors for the aging population? And if not, how do we get them? And then ultimately, what is the role of politics in the changing U.S. world, but also the global world, as we have seen played out through the media these last several years? So in any time of change, as we've all experienced, there's going to be team tensions, and there's going to be team tensions between leadership and their employees, possibly between leadership and their vendors, likely employees and their spouses. So you can just think of all the tensions that are going to occur once somebody announces there's going to be major change. And this occurs on the home front as well. But the first thing everybody does is, we're human. We want to know, what about us? What about me? What's going to be my situation based off this change? How will the infrastructure change? Will we have more offices, less offices? Will we have to come to work 5 days a week? Will we have to be a 24/7 organization? What kind of things might change within our culture? Maybe we were a little laid back on accountability and key performance indicators, but now that's going to change, and just identifying what that looks like. And then finally, the becoming more and more interdependent relationship of talent and technology. As we continue in the future, if there's fewer employees in the US and there's growing technologies, how do you bridge those together so that people can still have fulfilling life work and yet leverage technology for efficiencies? So now, of course, change is inevitable. We have to think about our role in that, and how do we do that? First is thinking about the company's vision and mission. Will it have to be changed? Will it have to be updated, modified? And ideally, as change is coming, leadership can get far enough ahead of it in their plan to be able to go through all of these steps. Again, understanding the speed to market is faster than ever, and the consumer demands are higher than ever, and competition is encouraging, if not requiring, that companies stay on their best game all the time and get to market faster and with the best quality. Considering all the insights that are out there, I'm still surprised how many companies do not do any type of insights work around their business and the changing industry, the consumer, and even what's going on in the global world that could impact their business. But the reality is this should probably be ramping up in the future. Communication, not only is it important what communication you'll have internally, but also what types of communication will be needed externally, especially in light of social media. It's often best to try to do some contingency or scenario planning, and just anticipating that something might get out, or somebody might put a negative spin on what is really a great idea. How will you then have external messages ready and able as quickly as possible to tell your own brand story in your own way? Again, we talked about the role of talent, and I bring this up several times because I'm a big believer in the key differentiation of any business is how well they can attract and retain talent. Whether you go to a good restaurant and they have great waiters and waitresses, or you go to another one where it's just, hi, what can I get you? A lot of that is how the beliefs and culture of that organization is and how they attract and retain talent. And then ultimately, probably more now than ever, having an innovate or die mentality. We've seen a lot of organizations that have lost relevancy. Sears, we've seen in the media lately. We see all the mergers and acquisitions of the banking industry. And so it's just really important to think about how are we going to stay relevant to our consumer and continue to grow into the future. And if organizations aren't already investing in technology, they're already behind there, because it's going to take technology likely to go into this online world and address the stay-at-home consumer. So when you think about your team, what are they really looking for? They're going to be in a what's in it for me. I'm sure many of you have heard of WIFM before, but if you think about what kind of considerations and expectations they have, how might that change or influence how you go about the whole change cycle in your organization? So what is the awareness of the need for change? The more you can tell them about why change is coming, why it's necessary, the better. Will you want them to participate and support the change? One of the best ways to do that is to involve them in some of the decision making, if that's possible, or to at least ensure that you get their input prior to decisions being communicated. Knowledge about how to change, again, going back to skills. If you're going to go to more specific key performance indicators, you probably might need to have some training, and also make sure they know about the training cycle, which ties right into the next one. Can they implement the new skills and behaviors? And if not, how do you get them there, assuming you want to get them there? And finally, most importantly, is how are you going to reinforce and sustain the change? So often we forget to have positive recognition or share just appreciation, especially in a time of change, because everything is so frazzled. But again, if you're moving towards some type of organizational culture change, reinforcing the behaviors you want and constructively providing feedback for the behaviors you don't want is going to be critical for all levels of the organization. So as you prep the team for change, and ultimately every organization wants to have a successful change transition as possible. And again, ideally, if somebody's envisioning a change in 2020, hopefully they've already got all of these cycles or these elements figured out into their plan, and they're already working on them, because the further you can get ahead of the announcement, the better. I know for some publicly traded companies, that's obviously not the case, but if you can do it, it's very beneficial, and it'll also keep the team the most productive they can be in driving revenues during a time of change, as we've seen many companies lose ground as the infrastructure is reorganizing. So, what are key milestones? Back to the point, what will the role of collaboration be with your vendors and your employees? And if there is going to be no collaboration, it's best to just tell them you're not, leadership's going to make these decisions. What is the changes in the industry and the consumer? As we talked about, fastest pace of change ever, access to information like never before. I can Google anything I want. I can fact check anything that is posted on social media within minutes. So again, everybody's access to information is at a new level. And we already talked about the role of technology. One of the thoughts that also ties into the communication plan is Q&A venues. So often during a time of change, there's just email communication from leadership directly to the team or to the other key stakeholders. So how do you keep them involved? And involved could be just meaning informed of what's going on things such as the consumer research. Maybe you started the change, you got some consumer research, you're going to maybe change the pace of change based off new information. So making sure that they're all in the loop on that. Will relocation be required as any part of this? Again, putting more personal stress on some individuals if they don't want to move. And then also the mode of communication. And this is one where I've seen work really well, especially during my time in McDonald's with Q&A venues, where there would be a webcast similar to this, where leadership would go through some key information points, and then it would be opened up for Q&A, allowing the employees to ask questions or in a way fact check what they're hearing at the water cooler. And it creates a two-way dialogue, which relieves tension and most importantly enables management to get the messages out that they want versus the one that are being created for them within the organization. Oftentimes explaining why the change is necessary help. Maybe the business is struggling financially and we're going to have to let some people go, or we're going to have to sell off a part of the business. And then again, industry changes might require a company to bring in more technological advancements, which unfortunately alleviate some of the need for human capital. But again, thinking about the why and how the organization could help that employee who is going to be let go, how do they help them through that transition post the reorg? Sharing authentically the timelines and milestones if you can. Again, publicly traded companies have more of a challenge with this as it could affect the stock price, but if there are things that can be communicated, nothing is worse for an employee or a vendor partnership than for them to read something in the media that they didn't hear from leadership of the organization. So as close to just-in-time communication as you can do is always valued and appreciated. And then also, how does each department, individual, potentially a remote office prepare for this change? And in many cases, it's going to be different. So helping folks wrap their heads around what that might look like and adjust to it is helpful. And then ultimately, the communication plan, we've seen a lot of people do this poorly. We've seen some do it very well, but really it's important that what can they expect from leadership during this transition and what is expected of them, when they'll know more and how it will be communicated. And again, just how do you keep the two-way communication open relative to what's real or fiction? So as the role of the leader, this slide, as I put it together, really speaks to what we're teaching in the strategic leadership class this quarter for the MBA program, as so many organizations don't realize that they have to step up how they perform, how they model, and how they communicate during a time of change. Knowing that there's fear and concern, how can leaders alleviate that? I gave some examples under communication, but it could also bring in outside change experts. It could also be bringing in subject matter experts to, again, share we're not alone in this, understanding how the KPI changes will be and the accountability levels so that people, again, can decide what they want to do. I've seen many times, I remember when McDonald's started adding email communication and got rid of snail mail. Unfortunately, several of the franchisees decided to retire at that time because they knew they were no longer going to get their communication and information through the mail. So again, how they would get it through email, what was their expectation of relevant communication and uses of email completely changed the environment. But for some folks, they quickly realize I can't do this or I don't want to do this. So they may self-select out during a change. And this is also helpful for the leader. Obviously, it takes time and prepare as such. So as people don't want to get on board or they don't have the skills, more importantly, how do you prepare them? Do you provide training classes? Do you have any type of outside resources or through their medical insurance to talk to counseling? It just really is important to think about not only the individual or the organization, but rather the individual and what can be done to minimize disruption in the workplace as you're going through the change. And then as much as possible, define what the new normal is so that everybody kind of understands. I know McDonald's just moved down to downtown Chicago. And for about 2 years before the move from Oak Brook to downtown, there was a lot of discussion about the new building, what it would have that was better than the existing building. They actually created a floor of the existing building and they remodeled it to show everybody what the new office space would look like in the new facility. They talked about transportation, knowing that some people would have to take the train versus driving in, but it's really important to go through the considerations, because then you can help everybody else on the team start thinking about how this change is really going to impact them. I thought I'd throw in this transition curve that many of you have probably experienced or even used in your work environment, but it's just a good reminder of, as human beings, we all go through this change. Whenever we hear of something big, it could be, hey, we just got married. It could be, hey, they're laying off 1,000 people at my work. It could be a new baby. Your kids leave home. And how long we stay in each of these positions on the transition curve is obviously very individual, and probably dependent on how prepared you were for the change in the first place. So there's usually some type of a sudden shock when, oh my gosh, this is happening, which could lead to, I don't even know what to do, so I don't do anything, numbness and paralyzation, likely to deny that the change is really going to happen, or that, we've heard this before, they're not going to really follow through, to, okay, now if it's really going to happen, who am I going to blame for this? Do I blame myself for not staying up to date or consider taking another job earlier? Do I blame others because if they had worked harder, this wouldn't be happening to me and to us? Some type of panic or fear. There can be a lot of depression and insecurity, even with the most confident of people. I consider myself pretty confident, but have lived definite, maybe not the depression side, but definite insecurity at points, to the point where, individuals likely hit rock bottom, and there's going to be some type of acknowledgement and acceptance that, okay, this is really going to happen. Maybe it didn't happen before, but it's really going to happen this time, and I need to just move forward. So they might, dip their toe in the water and try a couple new things, take a training class, learn a skill they didn't know before, be nicer to the new boss. There's feelings of maybe optimism, hope, and now I realize I can do this. I'm excited about the new learning and opportunities, to now I have fully integrated into this new organization. I can tell you that when McDonald's has done some bigger changes in particular, we have looked at this curve and tried to identify key influencers, if you will, in the transition process. And also people who might stay at the lower end longer than maybe you would like, who could serve as derailers, or maybe people who that they always take change well, and they can help drive and influence change. So that was a very productive learning, if you will, to try to think through your powerful team members, your powerful vendors, and how do you make them part of the solution, knowing that there will be several people who cannot ever move past panic and dread. So now you're in your new normal, and as you help your team go along through this process, identifying revenue growth, and is it changing because you're adding or merging with some other company, or you're actually deciding to drop off one of the income sources. Many companies want to lead the way, and as we've seen a new normal, you can think about what Uber did to the transportation industry, because they were going to meet the needs of the customer faster than anyone, which obviously they're leading the way, caused change in other organizations, similar to what Amazon has done with home delivery. And now all the grocery stores are like, I didn't lead the way, so I need to get on board. What's the communication plan within this new normal? Will it change? And how do people get information or get their questions answered if they have them? What are the new accountability measures and streams and communication processes? Many companies over the last several years have added accountability measures relative to their vision and mission, or values and culture, which really just speaks to, it's not just about how much you do, it's how you get the results you get, which really speak to the values of the organization. What the expected financial results are, and then consideration for rolling innovation and change. And this is really, again, where the investment in technology comes in, where R&D comes in, because if you aren't continuing to look at other ways to make the business drive more revenue or create more efficiency, then ultimately, if it's not this year or 3 years from now, you face the potential of being irrelevant to the consumer and having to do a lot more work and catch up than you would have had to do if you'd kept track of that along the way. So in summary, this is the key points that we talked about relative to change. What occurs with your strategic plan, consumer impact, team impact, impact of technology, what are the measures of success. The guy with the light bulb is really understanding the mental state of everyone involved, what the communication plan is, and roles and responsibilities. Now, I didn't talk as much about the consistency, but I want to speak to it here because I have seen both in the transitions that I've been through and watching other companies go through transition, consistency of message is one of the most important things that the leaders can do. Nothing causes a reduction in productivity or creation of fear than if leadership is delivering multiple or unauthentic messages. So if the requirement is going to be relocation, and one of the leaders says, oh no, don't worry, Bob, I'm not going to make you relocate. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Bob is obviously now confused. He doesn't know who to believe. It creates more anxiety for Bob, and his productivity level is likely to go down, and ultimately there's going to be more water cooler talk. So going back to company values, unfortunately, I've seen leaders removed from the organization at times of change because they're not supporting the consistent communication within the organization. So that's very, very, very important. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Fergal so he can tell us about the Q&A process, and we'll take it from there. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Cody. If anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand and I can select you, or if you want to type it into the webinar chat, I can read them out that way. But I just want to address some of the questions that came in during the week. Cody, one of the questions we got during the week was, what are the biggest mistakes leaders have made during a change process?
What are some of the biggest mistakes?
Sorry, mistakes. Yes, mistakes, I beg your pardon. What are some of the biggest mistakes leaders have made during a process of change?
Yeah, so a couple really big ones. One, of course, is sending inconsistent messaging when it's been clear that they need the leadership to get on board, or these are the messages we need everybody to be sending. The other one is, I'm going to say, a communication block. Oftentimes during times of change, upper management or C-suite will send communication to the VPs with the assumption that the VPs will cascade that throughout their teams or organization. But instead of doing that, maybe they have a bad attitude or they don't know what their security of their job is. So they just say, I'm not even going to take the time to worry about my people, so I'm not going to send this communication on, which tends to cause problems definitely for them longer term, and then also the team. And then ultimately is the proactive communication plans and contingency for, I guess you just say, unintended communication about the organization. Whether I give you a couple examples within McDonald's, one of which was that they were going to change the leadership organization of the franchisees, and somebody put that in the media before the CEO and president of the U.S. could talk about the franchisees about why this was a good thing to do. And anything that the key stakeholders hear from the media before they hear from leadership, one, can you anticipate any of that? And two, if you didn't anticipate it, how quickly can you get it turned around with telling your side of the story?
Very good. A question we received from Carrie-Anne Reese was, who and what gives you the inspiration, drive, and energy to succeed?
I kind of laugh because I think so much of it, and for those of us who are parents, some of it I think is nature versus nurture, having two children and seeing one who is as driven as I am and the other one who doesn't appear to be driven much at all. I also feel like growing up, I had very strong influencers. One, I was the first person from my family to graduate from college. So, them encouraging me to get an education, which has really made me a lifelong learner to this day. And I think that also keeps you driven, because the more you know, or oftentimes the more fiction I hear, the I want to dive deeper and really know what's going on. But for several years now, I've just had a purpose-driven life where I feel that one of the key areas I can deliver value to other people is by helping them create their best life. And that might mean helping them find their inner strength, helping them find their best skill set, helping them have the courage to stand up for something that is important to them. Really just ultimately helping them find their confidence to be their best self. And I don't know if I could teach it. I don't know if I could, pass it on. I just know it's who I am and how I have been pretty much since I was a small child.
Wonderful. One of the questions I actually have is, I'm not going to hijack this webinar, but how do you deal with someone who is reluctant to change, someone who says, we've always done it this way, and they just don't want to get on board? Like, how do you deal with that negative attitude?
Well, so first off, I think that's a point that everybody on the call has probably wondered at some point or another. And if you have to deal with it, how do you deal with it gracefully? And so when I think about the best option is, of course, to get the person to get on board, even though it might take a minute. And generally, you have to define how long a minute is. Again, using that email example where ultimately I was in Seattle at the time, we switched over and we had 10 franchisees who had never even logged into their email. And so beyond all the encouragement, I had to send people in to meet with each of those franchisees and said, either you're going to get on board on email or you're not going to be a valued partner of the McDonald's system anymore, because we have no way to communicate with you and you're making that impossible. So that's really like a rubber meets the road type of a conversation. In most cases, though, I've seen that explaining the why and explaining how the change impacts them, even though it has been tried before and didn't work. Obviously, technology today is different. Oftentimes in a company, leadership is different. The competitive set is different. So the tenacity within which leaders force the change is probably stronger than it's ever been. And at some point, you just might have to tell that person, either get on board or you're going to have to find a company or an organization that works in the way we worked in the past, but we're not working that way anymore.
Okay, that's good advice. If there's any other questions, you can raise your hand in the box and I can unmute you. So you give it 30 seconds, or you can type it into the Zoom webinar chat box, which should be on your screen, if anyone would like to ask any further questions. Cody, do you have any final thoughts?
No, just a quote that always stands near and dear to me, that change is inevitable, growth is optional. Just again, understanding that we're never in any situation, family, individual, or organizationally, going to stop change if it's coming. So how do we help ourselves accept and grow within that change and use it as a learning opportunity, because it's coming no matter what.
Okay. We actually have a question here from Mark. Mark asks, you mentioned the importance of consistency. What would your approach be when an organization has experienced a lot of fits and starts and changes in leadership, leaving staff morale low?
Okay, so can you repeat that again? Because I think I missed part of it, so I don't answer.
You mentioned the importance of consistency. What would your approach be when an organization has experienced a lot of fits and starts and changes in leadership, leaving staff morale low? So I think what Mark's getting at is when they've tried things and leadership has changed and staff morale is very low.
Yeah, so, well, and I guess I have to say that I've been fortunate in that I haven't seen that play out, though I've heard of it, of course. And whether it's a publicly traded or private company, ultimately somebody is going to become frustrated with, to your point, the ever revolving door of leadership, probably high turnover, low revenue or profitability because morale. And ultimately, it's somebody generally outside the organization who has to insist on change, or a strong leader within the organization who has to insist on change. And then once that leader is found, it's really up to them, through their identification of the mission, vision, and values, to instill upon the leadership team, this is what we're going to do, and this is what I need you to do. And honestly, if you can't do it, the door's open and we'll help you find employment, and saying it in as kind of way as you can, but making it very clear that you're not going to stand by naysayers getting in the way of that much needed change. As far as, if leadership continues to go through the revolving door and none of them are good leaders, I'm not really sure how to suggest that you help with that, unless your company has some type of an integrity line, that you as employees can start sending messages of disgruntledness, if you will, to somebody else who will read it and instill the change within the organization.
Okay. We have another question from Timothy, and he asks, in the days of a diverse geographic locations versus an industry located in one isolated location, like a building, what are the keys to facilitate change in a global or national level that span great distances?
Yes, so I'm a big believer in that this is really the way of the future. As I said, when I ran my McDonald's market, it was 5 states, 800 restaurants. I had remote staff. Probably 40% of the staff was remote, 60% worked out of the Denver office. And the first thing you have to do is leverage technology, and you have to be willing to do that. I know we're doing a Zoom call here with slides. These work very well, but leveraging virtual meetings where you can see each other are also extremely beneficial, especially if you do webinars frequently, because sometimes you can't tell if people are paying attention, if they're on their phone, if they're making a funny face because they didn't like something you said, which of course, generally you can take advantage of all of that if you were all in the same building. But it's not that alone. I'm a big believer that leadership must be present to win. And what I mean by that is, I went to my Arizona market twice a month. And one of those times each month, I pulled my Arizona team together for a meeting, and I created one of those information sessions, if you will, where I could talk to the team individually. I could share some things about the business specific to their market, and then have open dialogue. And the dialogue wasn't always for me as the leader. I would bring my head of marketing, my head of finance, but it enabled us as the leadership of the market to deliver the consistent message to all the leaders in all of our states, and that included the franchisees. Now, what I will tell you, especially as you start moving to virtual meetings, a lot of people don't want to see their screen on their face on a screen. And we were actually struggling with this with McDonald's when I left, because they were trying to build some efficiency, and instead of having 200 people fly to every market twice a year to do like a road show, if you will, how could you do some of that road show by flying people to Chicago? Or how could you do some of that road show through a virtual meeting, leveraging people being able to look at each other and see responses and face language, or body language rather. But many of the franchisees were like, nope, absolutely not. There's no way I'm going to let you see my big nose on that screen. So again, I'm sure they're still working through that change, taking more than a minute. And as much as you might have wanted that to happen next quarter, it might take a year of helping people reduce their fears of using the new technology. But I'm a firm believer it can be done. McDonald's International does it very well. And I'm sure others can as well. But the leader leadership will really have to push it, because a lot of folks don't feel technology savvy enough to leverage the tools that are available.
It's a very good point. I know you have recently retired, but Ron has asked, I don't know, maybe you have some experience of this from the corporate world, but how do you jump back into the workforce after a 10 to 12 year absence due to an early retirement? Any advice on that?
Okay, so he said, how do you jump in after how long of an absence?
Yeah, how do you jump back into the workforce after a 10 to 12 year absence due to early retirement?
Okay, well, so I'm going to say I only retired 15 months ago, and I can say, deciding first of all what I want my next gig to be, or if I want there really to be a next gig, is part of the challenge. And without really defining that for oneself, I think it's hard to figure out which way to go and really where to invest all your energy. But what I can tell you, and that's really why I started the consulting company, is it gives me a great opportunity to learn from other organizations and other industries, at the same time providing value back to them. So while I probably won't make $500,000 as a consultant, I can say that I'm learning a lot, which is addressing my desire for lifelong learning. I'm making some money, and I feel like I'm very much so contributing to others. In the same frame, though, I am looking at other opportunities, which requires a lot of networking. And as much as I consider myself an extrovert, I can say that networking is still uncomfortable, but it's a necessary part of finding that. And then the final thing I would say is, in talking to several other individuals, is if you feel you're lacking a skill of any kind, how do you take classes to become more knowledgeable that will help you in the job that you are ultimately looking for? And so for myself, probably about 3 months after I left McDonald's, I hired a coach on social media training because I really wanted to understand how to leverage it in a positive way. While I haven't done a whole lot with it, I now know that I know it. I can create my own website. I can keep track of business indices on posts. So I did learn a lot, and I do believe it'll be very valuable if and when I go back to work. Even if I just consider trying to get on boards, I believe it'll be very beneficial to the board, as well as we talked about communication and contingency planning, because it's unfortunate how many organizations don't really have a process for that.
Interesting. Yes. One question from a Donald Mitchell. Being a follower and former leader, how do you feel is the best way to challenge change if you really feel a particular change is detrimental? So if management is trying to implement a change which you believe to be detrimental, how do you manage that? Or what approach would you take to that?
Well, so my first thought is, if you know it's detrimental, but you feel you need to share it anyway, then you should share it. Because I often think too many times in a company, truth yields to power more often than it should. And sometimes as leaders, you don't know what you don't know. So, but on the flip side of that, if you're really going to push that they're making the wrong decision, I think you have to knowingly know that if you push too hard, you might not work there anymore. And so I've been fortunate that I've had leadership that valued my opinion, and I was able to influence them maybe to either slow down the change in a certain area, consider a better way to communicate the change, or even put a change initiative on hold so more information could be gathered. And we've all seen movies where there's the whistleblower, if you will, who really feels that they have to bring it to someone's attention. In some cases it works out well, in some cases it doesn't work out so well. So I think understanding both ends of the spectrum on the outcome is important.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And just one more question from Calvin. How does one manage change in an organization managed by tradition?
Well, so I'm going to think, when I hear that question, Calvin, I think of family-owned businesses. And I saw this a lot in McDonald's as well, even though they were with a global company. a parent who, let's just say, had been in McDonald's for 40 years, and they now have their son or daughter in their business who are maybe now in their middle 30s, right? Much more comfortable with technology, much more comfortable with the evolving employee base, and watching how that next generation leader influences their parent in this family business for change. I also have to say, I've seen where the next generation leader or the legacy rules, if you will, or processes are not allowed to go away. And I'm not sure if you saw Modern Family this week, but Claire was dealing with her dad just on this very topic. And so I think sometimes as employees, and I worked in a family-owned business, I actually was trying to be recruited for a family-owned business and said, no, I never want to do that again. Sometimes I don't think you can get past the patriarch or matriarch in changing their ways, and it can be a difficult challenge. So I think as an employer or a leader within that organization, you have to decide how long you're willing for either the next generation to take over or the leader to become more open-minded.
Yeah, that's very good advice, actually. Yeah, thank you very much, Cody. This has been very helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. The recording of this webinar will be available on the Regis University Alumni Association, our engagement YouTube channel, hopefully before the end of this week. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up questionnaire if anyone would like to complete it. The webinar series will be continuing this year, so I really appreciate your time, Cody, and thank you. And thank you for everybody for attending. Your attendance is greatly appreciated.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.